The base was locked in confusion. Unknown signal. No beacon. No call sign. Command said, "Hold position. Wait for confirmation." Screens blinked. Voices overlapped. The launch crew froze. Tessa stood at the edge of the telemetry bay. She said nothing. She had seen the curve before. While they argued over protocol, she walked. No checklist, no clearance, just one aircraft no one was watching. By the time the tower noticed, she was airborne. The signal was real. She met it in the dark, then turned it away. The desert base simmered under a heat that never truly left, even in the early hours. Dry wind curled around the concrete pads and kicked at the red dust along the chain-link perimeter. From the north-facing bay window of the telemetry center, the runway stretched into a haze of sun-reflected glare. Inside, the room stayed dim, lit by soft green console glow and the low hum of idle chatter from analysts reviewing routine data. Tessa sat at the far end of the watch floor, quiet and alone. Her headset looped around her neck and not yet needed. Her screen displayed raw radar return feeds, mostly uneventful pulses, and weather scatter scrolling across in lazy arcs. She had worked this position for 7 months now, not by accident, not by choice. Her badge still bore her flight cert clearance level, though no one used it. On paper, she was listed as support-grade telemetry observer, authorized to flag anomalies for senior review. In practice, no one looked at her reports anymore. They smiled when she logged in, nodded when she passed them in the corridor, but never asked her thoughts. Once, she had flown combat sim runs tighter than anyone else in the wing. She had been Trace then. That call sign was retired. No ceremony, no revocation, just gone from the board one morning, quietly overwritten. Her fingers moved steadily over the console, eyes tracking the return pattern out of habit more than hope. At 23 minutes past the hour, she paused. A small, irregular echo blinked near the outer perimeter marker, right on the fringe of Zone 4. Too quick for weather scatter. Too smooth to be equipment error. She shifted one display pane and ran a raw pulse overlay, filtering out civilian spill. The curve came again. Shallow dip, brief stall, arcing tail. She knew it. Not theoretically. Not as a guess. She had seen that same curve months ago during night training sim live monitor. She had flagged it then too, and been told it was a thermal bloom bounce. She didn't believe that then. And she didn't now. Across the bay, one of the other monitors called out a range check to his partner, laughing over a heat trace that turned out to be a bird swarm. Tessa said nothing. She made a soft notation in the margin of her desk pad and adjusted the frequency band manually. It was gone now? Of course it was. The ghost signal never stayed long. She finished her rotation quietly, filed the shift log, and walked back toward her barracks without speaking. Outside, the heat wrapped around her like an engine blanket. She passed a pair of pilots headed to the briefing tent. One of them glanced at her and kept walking. She didn't take it personally. They probably didn't know her name. Not anymore. Her room sat on the outer edge of the enlisted block, farther from the hangars. The concrete walls inside were clean but bare. One bed, one folding chair, a wall terminal that blinked sleep mode. On the shelf sat a single mug and a laminated checklist clipped behind it. Her boots came off with a soft thud. She opened the small storage drawer beneath the bunk and paused. Inside, a cloth-wrapped bundle rested against the back corner. She slid it forward gently, unwrapped one edge. Her gloves lay folded, fingers curled slightly from the last time she wore them. Beneath the gloves, her patch-black fabric with white stitching still bore her call sign. Trace, not a name anymore, just a leftover from a record no one checked. She left the bundle untouched and set it back into the drawer, closing it slowly. On the desk, a folded radar printout sat beside a pen. She unfolded it and layered her latest margin note over the older curve. The lines aligned almost perfectly. her handwriting clear. Benya marked angle and drift timing with small corrections added in pencil. No one would read it but her. The air outside shifted slightly as a gust rolled through the alley between barracks. Dust lifted off the walkway. A pair of jets roared in the distance, sharp and controlled, engines clean at climb. Tessa didn't watch. She already knew the sound of a Viper climbing past 100.0% throttle. She had lived inside it once. The rhythm never left. She ran her finger once across the curve she'd drawn, circled the midpoint gently, and looked out the small window above her desk. The sky over the perimeter glowed pale orange near the horizon. No warning lights, no sirens, just heat, silence, and a vanishing line. She wasn't chasing ghosts. She remembered the curve, and next time, if it came again, she'd be ready, not with reports, not with requests, with the same silence they had given her, and something far sharper beneath it. The operations center pulsed with heat and noise, the kind that filled rooms more than it served them. Overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly against the whir of cooling fans, while the projector screen flickered through a rotating set of flight vectors and weather overlays. Morning coffee steamed in paper cups lined across the table, their lids marked with squadron numbers and call signs. Laughter rose from the far end where a group of flight officers leaned in around a display. Jackets unzipped, sun still fresh on their shoulders from morning lineup. Their rhythm was practiced, confident, loud. None of them looked toward the doorway when Tessa entered. She walked in carrying a single folded radar printout and a marked log entry clipped at the top. Her boots were clean but dull from wear, her hair tucked simply behind her ears, her presence unobtrusive. She waited until the conversation lulled slightly before stepping forward and setting the report on the table's edge, just beside the regional airspace map. Her voice stayed even. I logged a secondary return during the night shift, near Zone 4. It's the same curve as last October's anomaly. Loop drift, not scatter. A few heads turned, most didn't. One junior officer barely out of his flight check cycle smirked without looking away from his screen. Did the cloud ghosts come back? Trace. The name hung there, not shouted, just loud enough to carry. A few soft chuckles followed. One of the older pilots leaned back in his chair and stretched his legs. His boots tapped once against the floor before he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn flight patch. The stitching was half unraveled. Without standing, he tossed it across the table. It landed near her report and spun once before settling. The faded lettering read, Trace in white. Found this in a laundry bin last week. Thought maybe you were still looking for it. She looked down at the patch, then up at the screen. Her hands stayed at her sides. The screen now displayed the radar drift she had flagged. A faint arc, pale against the base grid, moving just long enough to be real, but short enough to be dismissed. One of the analysts toggled a layer on the display and said something about heat haze. Another added that it was probably a terrain ghost off the eastern ridge. The tone stayed light, confident, unbothered. No one asked her what the previous drift looked like. No one pulled her old report. Probably a glitch, someone said near the coffee machine, or a weather echo. We've got haze at altitude this week. The officer who had thrown the patch now stood, stretching his back. He nodded toward her printout and said, She's just nervous someone's going to miss her spreadsheets. Tessa didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She picked up the radar printout and folded it once, sliding it under her arm. The patch stayed on the table. As she turned to leave, the chatter resumed. A few muttered about flight priorities. One asked if his gear load had been confirmed. Someone reached for another cup of coffee. She passed between them without eye contact and stepped out into the corridor, where the walls were lined with black and white images of past operations, each one labeled with aircraft types and dates, none newer than 5 years. Her pace didn't quicken. Her posture didn't change. She walked out into the hallway, down the side stairwell, and across the rear lot toward the telemetry annex, where the buzz of radar feeds never reached above a whisper. She keyed in her access code, shut the door behind her, and sat at the corner desk where the overhead light burned a little too white. The drawer beside her chair remained closed. She could feel its contents without opening it: the cloth-wrapped gloves, the backup patch she had never thrown away, a page from her original training binder with her hand-drawn radar curve. She didn't touch them. Instead, she unfolded the printout again and laid it over an older one she had kept filed in the bottom of her shift binder. She aligned the edges. Same drift vector, same pulse dip, same arc re-entry on the blind side of Zone 4. She circled the midpoint in ink, not pencil, then drew a clean line beneath the time code. One of the computer screens cycled back to standby. The others hummed on. She knew what she had seen. She knew what it wasn't. The base would keep moving. The reports would file into the archive. Someone would wave it off as interference from cross-channel traffic. That had been the story last time. And it would be again, until the signal came back stronger. When it did, no one here would be looking in the right direction. She leaned back slightly, her arms crossed. Her eyes stayed on the curve. Her mind tracked it past the edge of the screen. Outside, the last of the morning flights took off in pairs. The roar was dull from inside, distant and patterned, like waves hitting the same stretch of shore. She once flew that pattern, climbed through the same vector with 100.0% throttle, and a finger resting, just light enough on the stick to feel the resistance turn smooth. She remembered how it felt when the Viper lifted. The control wasn't in the weight, it was in the listening. Now they listened only to each other. Her call sign was a punchline, her warning a joke, but the signal wasn't gone. It had simply vanished the way it had before. Not deleted, just silent, waiting. The telemetry bay emptied by 2100 hours, one by one. The analysts signed out and left behind only the quiet hum of monitors still running silent feeds. Tessa stayed. She kept the lights low, just the green wash of her console illuminating the notepad beside her. The radar logs cycled in soft intervals, slow and steady across the screen. Every few minutes. She adjusted the frame range, toggled the filters, and marked a small notation on paper. She wasn't logging the signal anymore. She was memorizing it. The loop arc didn't behave like weather clutter. It traced a known angle, rose briefly, and vanished at the same vector each time. She drew the shape again on a fresh sheet, tracing it from muscle memory. The rise at midpoint, the shallow dive on exit. It wasn't a coincidence. It was navigation quiet and deliberate. At 2200, she shut down the monitor feed and stepped outside. The wind had cooled. Desert night pressed in low and dry, with a faint scent of scorched rubber and metal that lingered near the flight line. Sodium lights buzzed overhead, their orange halos barely cutting through the stillness. Across the ramp, no crews moved. The last sortie had landed. The base slept in posture, but not in silence. A generator hummed near the operations tent. Tessa walked slowly past it, heading toward the perimeter. She traced the outer edge of the tarmac, boots quiet on the cracked surface, past the ready stations, beyond the training pads. She kept her pace steady, matching each gate to the flight deck protocol drilled into her years ago. Nose check, panel sweep, brake lock, ladder clearance. Her steps mirrored old rhythm. She could still hear her instructor's voice, calm and clipped, calling sequence in her head. Near the hangar storage row, the motion lights didn't flick on. She preferred it that way. The dark made it easier to move without being noticed. One hangar door stood slightly ajar, cool air drifting out, the sharp tang of fuel biting at the back of her throat. Inside, a standby, F-16C Viper rested in sleep mode. Canopy closed, tail light off, panels shut. It looked untouched, forgotten. She stepped into the hangar slowly, not rushed, not hesitant. The overhead fixtures glowed a soft bluish white, diffused through grime-streaked lenses. Her shadow moved ahead of her, long and stretched over the concrete. She approached the aircraft with quiet purpose. No clipboard, no checklist, just instinct. Reaching the side of the cockpit, she rested one hand gently on the edge of the canopy rail. The metal was cold under her fingers. She didn't climb in. She didn't open the panel. She only reached up with her other hand and touched the side of the yoke through the open access slot. It fit her grip, as it always had. Her fingers didn't tremble. It didn't matter that she wasn't cleared to fly it. She wasn't preparing for approval. She was preparing for accuracy. She stood there for 1 full minute, breathing with the rhythm of the flight deck she remembered, switch by switch, flow check, pressurization, left hand on throttle, right on yoke, sight line up, index finger resting lightly. Listen for the climb at 100.0. Know the lift. Own the quiet. She let her hand fall and stepped back. The aircraft remained still. The hum of power through the hangar lines buzzed faintly above. She walked out without turning on the floor light. Back in her quarters, the small desk lamp glowed amber. Her notepad was still open. She didn't sit. She flipped a page and redrew the curve from memory again. Tighter now. Angle adjusted by instinct. Time mark, 1 second earlier. If the signal repeated, she would know where it started and where it would end. The drawer beside her bunk stayed closed. Her gloves remained inside, wrapped in cloth. The patch lay beneath them. She didn't need them. Not yet. At 2300, she shut the notebook and stood by the window. Outside, the stars looked bleached, stretched thin across a black sky. Somewhere out there was the return point. And next time the loop came, she wouldn't report it. She would meet it. At exactly 0411 hours. The radar feed pulsed once on the telemetry wall, flickered with a low-band return, and went still. The shape had no ID, no beacon, no signature. But Tessa knew it. The arc was clean, soft on approach, sharp on the loop exit. It disappeared in the same corridor as before, just southeast of Zone 4. She didn't radio it in. She didn't flag a supervisor. She stood up from her console, slipped the notebook into her side pocket, and left the building without a word. The air outside was cold in a way that only desert pre-dawn could deliver. The wind dragged softly across the ramp, lifting corners of tarp straps and swaying a faded windsock overhead. The base was asleep. Lights inside the operations tower glowed red for night protocol. And the last hangar cruise had clocked out hours earlier. Tessa moved fast but quiet, cutting across the gravel perimeter of the pad toward Hangar 12, where the standby Viper sat under low sodium light. No flight crew prepped it. No checklist board stood beside it. It was listed inactive, offline, reserved for test sim diagnostics and scheduled inspection. She knew it would still fly. Inside the hangar, she opened the side access panel and moved with mechanical calm. Fuel check, line pressure, battery master armed. The startup switches moved beneath her fingers with remembered resistance. Her gloves, worn now and no longer sealed in cloth, gripped the canopy rail with muscle memory. She climbed in and closed the latch. The interior came alive in a slow, flickering sequence. Power surged, screens blinked blue. Her HUD lit green. She didn't rush. She bypassed the manual checklist. She didn't need it. She'd flown the sequence so many times in silence that it had become more reflex than routine. A low hum filled the canopy as she primed the throttle and eased the auxiliary systems online. No tow cart. No radio check. No wingman. Just her and a signal that wouldn't be dismissed again. She eased the brake release and nudged the jet forward. The tires rolled onto the outer taxi strip with a low grind. The tower hadn't noticed yet. At runway Mark 5, she flipped the final switch. The engine stabilized. Her fingers hovered above the throttle, steady. 100.0 power on tap. She pushed it. The Viper roared to life. Tower alarms went off immediately. Inside the flight deck, red lights flashed across screens. Radio traffic burst open with scrambled chatter. Who launched Viper 6? She's not cleared. That's a cold bird. Where's the deck crew? Someone respond. Tessa kept climbing. She did not answer. Her radio stayed on. Receive only. She heard the panic, the confusion, the command officer's voice rising. No one recognized her voice yet. No one saw her name in the launch log, because she had not used one. Outside, the sky was still black. The moon hung behind haze, a smudge of dim light through high drift. The ground disappeared beneath her, altimeter rising, wings level. Her grip didn't change. She crossed Zone 3 at high speed, then pulled gently toward the southeastern airspace. Nothing showed on radar except contour haze. She dialed the scan band manually, reducing sensitivity, widening spread. The screen lit once soft return. There it was. Same arc. Same timing. The unknown aircraft looped inward again, just like before. It wasn't random. It was reconnaissance. She cut her lights and climbed into its path. The hostile aircraft showed no strobes, no beacon, no signature, but the shape revealed itself in partial contrast against the dawn light sharp angles, asymmetric nose, twin inlets along a shadowed fuselage. It was gliding low toward the perimeter, fast, controlled, undetected. She did not hail it. Instead, she toggled her onboard transponder and transmitted a ghost echo. It was a loop signal, an old Viper calibration pulse, distorted to mask origin but force a response ping. The hostile aircraft flickered once on her screen, then dipped sharply. It registered the echo. That meant it had been watching base transponder protocols. It meant it had been learning. She broke formation, banked above it, and held vector until it pulled off course in reverse direction. It didn't fight. It didn't engage. It vanished into the haze the same way it had entered. Tessa watched its retreat vector fade off her display, the signal collapsing into silence. She circled once, just to be sure. Then she turned home. As she re-entered base airspace, the sky had begun to bleed orange along the edge of the hills. The tower's voice broke through again. Unidentified Viper, respond. This is base command. Identify immediately. Her hands remained still on the stick. Then she clicked her mic open. This is Trace. Intercept complete, returning to base. The silence that followed lasted several full seconds. Then every voice started speaking at once. She throttled down. Landing gear extended. The runway appeared ahead, edges lit with amber strobes. Her descent was perfect, glide angle precise, touchdown smooth. She braked gently and taxied toward the edge pad. Ground crew stood frozen beside the hangar apron. One tech dropped his wrench. Inside the command tower, radar screens played back her trajectory in loops. The signal return was confirmed. The intercept arc shown in real time. The same loop she had drawn. The breach was no longer theory. She powered down without a word, opened the canopy, removed her gloves slowly and rested them on the dash. The Viper had responded like it remembered her. The sun had just started to stretch across the eastern ridge when the F-16C Viper made its return pass over the forward base. It descended from the haze in a low glide, gear already extended, flaps clean, approach angle locked. The tarmac shimmered with dawn heat. Light caught the canopy in a flat reflection that revealed nothing. The jet touched down with perfect balance, no jolt, no overcorrect, just quiet wheels finding concrete. Across the ramp, ground crew paused mid-task. One tech, still holding a coil of signal cable, stopped in place, his eyes narrowing. A loadmaster carrying a case of flare canisters looked up just in time to see the Viper roll past at taxi speed, silent as a ghost. The control tower filled with static as radio calls overlapped. Viper 6 is on deck. Who cleared launch? Say again. Who cleared that pilot? Another voice cut across the chatter, sharper now. That aircraft wasn't logged. Where's the sortie sheet? Check the security feed who's on that bird. No one had the answer. Then, through the open line, a woman's voice came through. Calm. Even not rushed. This is Trace. Mission complete. Returning to standby. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. In the tower, one of the younger controllers dropped his headset to his neck. A supervisor stopped mid-sentence and turned to the primary radar terminal. already replaying telemetry from the past hour. On screen, the trace lines revealed a perfect arc across zones 3 and 4. The intercept sweep plotted in green, and a blip that wasn't one of theirs. No transponder, no beacon, no identification. It had flown in clean and quiet. Tessa had found it mid-approach, rerouted it blind, and forced a full disengagement. The Viper rolled to a stop near Bay 9. Its canopy opened slow, hydraulics soft. Tessa didn't remove her helmet right away. She sat still for a full breath. Then she unlatched the strap, set it aside, and stood. Her boots touched the concrete with the same quiet she'd left in. Her gloves remained on. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. Several feet away, 2 crew chiefs stood by the hangar door, unmoving. One of them opened his mouth, then closed it. A maintenance lead stepped toward the jet, hesitated, and backed off. They didn't know if they were allowed to approach. No one had seen her launch. No one had given the order. And now, she was back with proof. Inside the command center, the playback looped again. The unknown aircraft had made it within 1.5 miles of base perimeter before veering off. The intercept vector matched the exact anomaly she had reported months earlier. The radar signature, once dismissed as scatter, was now undeniable. It had flown the same arc, returned to the same corridor, and vanished on the same heading, only this time she had met it in the middle. A pilot in the back of the room said quietly, "That's the same pattern. Zone 4. Another officer leaned forward. "Pull her last report, the one we shelved." The lead controller didn't answer. He was still staring at the vector screen, watching the flight path glow in overlapping pulses. Her timing had been flawless. Entry at 2,000 feet, steady vector climb, intercept curve at angle 7.3, maneuvered without visual contact, forced a course break without weapons, comms, or radar assistance. She had flown blind, off script, and entirely alone. On screen, her final return call played again. "This is Trace. Mission complete." The name echoed through the ops deck. Near the bottom of the screen, her old call sign reappeared in the system overlay. A software protocol, set months ago, had auto-filled it when she transmitted from the Viper's tactical suite. Trace, block letters, no rank, no code prefix, just the name. A junior tech stared at the screen. Who cleared her? Someone behind him, older, quieter, answered without turning. She didn't wait to be at the ready bay. A small crowd had gathered behind the yellow line. Word had traveled fast. Nobody spoke to her as she dismounted. One crew member held out a clipboard reflexively, realized it didn't apply, and stepped back. Another officer came jogging from the hangar offices, slowed as he saw her walking, then stopped completely when she passed without flinching. Her flight suit was streaked from seat pressure. Dust coated the side of one boot. She carried nothing in her hands, not a helmet, not a report, just her presence. Behind her, the Viper's tail number remained lit. One of the line crews pulled out a chalk, paused, and looked toward the tower. The radio feed was still live across multiple rooms. Screens showed the breach intercept. It wasn't hypothetical anymore. It had happened. And she had stopped it before anyone else had even believed it existed. She walked toward the telemetry wing, past the barracks row and across the main courtyard. A pilot standing at the mess truck saw her and dropped his paper cup. It hit the ground without a sound. Someone near the East Comms post took a photo. No one posted it. Not yet. By the time she reached the main corridor entrance, the hallway lights had turned from red to full white. Systems returning to normal. Alerts fading. Her boots made soft contact with the tile floor, one echo at a time. No one blocked her path. No one asked where she had been. In the background, a screen refreshed. Flight status. Call signs active. Trace green. The hall outside the telemetry bay was still quiet when Tessa returned. Morning light had started to filter through the glass wall above the far stairwell, laying soft gold across the floor tiles. The alert sirens had gone silent. The flight line was active again. But this hallway remained empty, untouched by the urgency now pulsing through other corners of the base. Her boots moved soundlessly across the floor, worn soles brushing concrete with familiar rhythm. She passed 2 junior crew members near the annex door. They looked up, didn't speak, and stepped aside. She entered the bay without breaking stride. The main console lights were still dimmed for overnight settings. Only the center telemetry screen glowed in full, cycling through tracking logs and system pings. The radar sweep moved with its usual rhythm, slow arcs, soft tones. No new signals. No loops. On her desk, resting on top of her closed binder, was a folded patch. Black fabric, white stitching, the same one that had vanished from the board months ago, now quietly returned. Trace. There was no note, no signature, no explanation, just the patch, centered neatly, as if it had never left. She stood beside the desk and looked at it for a moment, not touching it right away. The screen beside her displayed a clean perimeter. No trace of the hostile flight remained. The corridor was quiet. It had flown once, looped twice, then gone. She didn't need proof anymore. The base had seen it. They had replayed the footage, heard her voice through the open channel, and watched the Viper land. Tessa reached down and picked up the patch. Her thumb brushed the stitching. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She opened the drawer under her desk and placed the patch inside, not hidden now, just stored. The gloves that had once stayed folded in cloth were there too. This time, she took them out. She didn't put them on, but she slid them into her side pocket where they hung naturally against her leg as she sat down. A quiet shuffle of footsteps passed behind her, then faded. No one entered the room. No one asked what she was doing. At the edge of her vision, the duty roster screen updated. 4 sortie slots for the next rotation. One of the names that had always shown up, Evan Locke, was missing now. She didn't look to see who replaced him. She leaned forward slightly and watched the radar sweep pass across the screen again. Still clean. Still clear. Her name now sat listed in the active telemetry log, auto-filled by the system the moment her final comm had landed. Not traced, not assigned, recognized. Trace. She didn't need it to be spoken. She didn't need them to admit they were wrong. The signal had come. She had met it, and she had returned. That was enough. She didn't need permission. She didn't need applause. What Tessa carried was not pride, but precision. When others laughed, she listened. When they dismissed her, she prepared. And when it mattered most, she acted not to prove anything, but because she already knew who she was. This is the story of quiet strength, of a woman who watched the pattern, trusted herself, and stepped forward when no one else would. In a world that often waits for titles, she moved on truth. And in doing so, she reminded us that being unseen does not mean being unworthy. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to reflect on someone you know who shows up quietly and without recognition. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories of quiet defiance, earned respect, and the strength that doesn't ask to be seen. It only waits to be known.